forward and show your face. This is Minal and this is CJ.
Hi everyone.
Yeah. CJ is going to talk about health is the new black. And as I was thinking, lifestyle is the new religion. Today is Janmashtami, but everyone's come here to find out how we can biohack and how we can improve our lifestyle, our health. And I was told that CJ is even going to give us some anti-aging tips. So when we walk out of here, we'll all be 20 years younger. So give him a big hand. I also want to say he lives in Dubai. And he's studying several courses on nutrition, and he will share those tips with us. A world traveler and a young and handsome man. So enjoy.
Everybody. And thank you for taking out the time to come here and inspire to learn about health is the new black. So,
It needs to be a little louder. Louder.
okay, can you hear me now? Better?
I think you need to hold volume for a hacker. Is it working?
Can you hear me at the back? Much better? Okay. So, thank you for your introduction. That was a very kind introduction. And let's begin. So, health is the new black. What we, as she mentioned, we're trying to promote a very healthy lifestyle, as well as normally there's a lot of people get a lot of attention when they talk about fashion, and they say this is the new thing which is trending. And I feel that health right now all over the world is trending a lot. Hence, I've given the presentation a title, Health is the New Black. So, today we're going to learn about two important things in health. First is gut health, and second is biohacking. So, by the show of hands, has anyone heard about gut health or biohacking in this room before? Okay, few hands. Perfect. So, my aim for today is to introduce you to these topics. I hope by the end of the presentation, you'll have a much more deeper understanding of how the gut microbiome works. And at the end of it, I'll be sharing my top biohacks and introducing you to the world of biohacking, as well as giving you some anti-aging tips. So, has anyone heard of Hippocrates before? Yes. Perfect. So, I don't have to explain that. Hippocrates, about 2,500 years ago, said all diseases begin in the gut. Yet, thousands of years later, we still, or medical or pharmacology, still doesn't really understand what the gut health is all about. Now, Hippocrates was a genius man, and today we're going to find out why. So, gut health. Gut health is simply the health and operation of about 300 to 500 different species of organisms living in our digestive tract. Now, these species are bacterial, fungal, and viruses. What is surprising is, which we haven't found out before, that in our digestive tract, we have about 100 trillion organisms that are playing a part in our mood regulation, our hormone placement, and the way we show up in the world. Now, has anyone been to the Amazon rainforest? I've heard of Amazon, seen some videos. So, and especially nowadays, it's in the news, right? So the Amazon rainforest is about 5.5 million square kilometers, and it hosts a variety of animals, plants, and trees. And our gut is only 30 square feet. Yet it still hosts a variety of microbiome which outnumber the species of plants and animals in the Amazon rainforest. So, what we call these groups of species is the microbiome. These organisms collectively are termed as the gut microbiome. Now, I want you to imagine these. Let me ask you this question. Have you heard that most of the times when your doctors tell you, oh, this disease is inheritary, or this is something that runs in your family, or this is in your genetic coding, right? So we tend to globally blame a lot of things on our genes, on the way our parents, grandparents, and our ancestors lived. But the reality is, genetics do play a lot of role in how you feel and what affects you. But it's more than genetics, it's the gut microbiome that really determine the difference. So these bacteria, which is about 100 trillion, have their own bacterial genes, which is 150 times more than the human genes. So when we think about genes, and we tend to blame everything on our genes, the human genome is paired in a set of 23 chromosomes. And we have about 20 to 22,000 genes, which classify us as humans. But the bacterial genes are about 3 million. And each of them are different. They operate in a different set. They're different when you separate them, they're different, but when they're collectively merged as a part of an organism, they do different things in your body. Now, bacterial genes science is still trying to find out what exactly do certain species of bacteria do. But since their discovery in the 1980s, a lot of people haven't really paid much attention on what they really do. In the last 5 years, science, doctors, and a lot of people in the health industry have been paying a lot of attention, and there are millions of dollars now being spent to understand the function of these bacteria. Our somatic cells, which are the human cells, are approximately 40 trillion with 20,000 genes. So I think most of the times blaming everything on genetics is not the best thing, because what really matters in your life is epigenetics, or which is the environment around you that affects you. Your gene can predispose you to a certain kind of problems, but if your epigenetics, which is the food that you eat, the movement that you have, the light that you're exposed to, is compromised, it will even overpower your genetic predisposition. So now, and why this is very strange is because in the medical community, any doctors or, okay. So in the medical community, we often say that all the research that have been done in a double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial, and this has the highest efficacy. So if they're testing out a drug, the way they will promote it is that this drug has been tested in a double-blinded study, and it's been accounted for. And one of the main things that you see when you read all these studies is all the other variants have been accounted for. But when you do the calculation, 99% of our self is actually bacteria. 1% of our genes is human. And those genes are the same that we have in chimpanzees and in gorillas. So when scientists say that they had occurred for every variant possible, they forgot to mention that they didn't test for that 99% of what makes us us, which is our microbiome. So now, all the studies that have been done in the past are being revisited, because now the new and the biggest factor is, did we test for the person's bacterial profile? Because bacteria can do a lot of things when you take drugs, as in medications or antihistamines or any kind of medical drugs. Now, so where does your microbiome come from? It evolves over time, but it essentially comes from your mother. So when you're born, you have your mother's microbiome, and the lifestyle factors that you choose encourages development of different microbial species. So let's see what they do and why are they so important. So the human body cannot really digest all the food that it has. So when you're having food, we don't have the necessary tools to digest everything. What microbiome do is that they digest our food for us. They're so specific that certain nutrients as well cannot be digested by the human body. If you take out certain strands of bacterial profiles from the humans, half of the food cannot be digested. So they digest our food. Has anyone heard of neurotransmitters? Okay. For those of you who haven't, neurotransmitters are chemicals which are flooding through your brain, and they're responsible for happiness, mood, tolerance, pain, regulation. Now, neurotransmitters have been said to be made in the brain, but the gut, or the gut microbiome as a whole, they make neurotransmitters as well. There is a neurotransmitter called serotonin, and 90%, heard of that? Okay. So 90% of the serotonin is actually made in your gut. So, and serotonin is a neurotransmitter for happiness. So your happiness actually comes from your gut. It is very less determined on the things that you see or witness. But if you are facing any kind of depression or anxiety, it is because your gut is not producing enough serotonin. It complements vitamins, so it helps synthesize vitamins and minerals. Some of the most common vitamins that we need in order to survive and to thrive is vitamin K and B complex. Now, lactobacillus is a specific species of bacteria that actually does synthesize this. So if there was no lactobacillus in your body, you wouldn't be able to absorb or synthesize vitamin K or any of the B complex vitamins. It produces essential nutrients as well, like acetylcholine. And the conversion of choline is all dependent on the microbiome, which we first thought, okay, we can take a supplement and it will just magically cure us. But if you don't have the right bacterial profile, no matter what supplement you take, it's not going to affect, or it's not going to affect as much as you thought. It's your second brain. Now, scientists have learned over the past 3 or 4 years that there is the gut. It not only does produce serotonin, but it functions as a brain itself. It's nicknamed the second brain. And this is because there is a nerve in your body which is called the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve travels all the way from your brainstem, and it goes to all your major organs. It goes to the heart, it goes to your kidneys, it goes to your liver. And the purpose of the vagus nerve is to transfer information all the way from your brain on how you're feeling, what do you want to do, and the environment around you, and then it affects your organs. And we've found out now that the vagus nerve does communicate with the gut, but okay. Okay, is it better now?
Look at us also.
I will look at you.
Please look at us also. Let's hold it close.
Okay.
Because we're over 60.
So the vagus nerve, now, we've found out that the fibers that connect your mind, from your brainstem to your organs, there are up to 9 times more fibers that communicate from your gut to your brain. So that means 90% of the times, it's not your brain that is telling your gut on what to do, but the communication is reversed. It is your gut which actually informs your brain what to do. There is no communication. It's a 10% communication chance where your mind can tell your gut something. But 90 to 95% of the times, it's how you're feeling in the gut that will influence your mood, and that will influence your brain. And that's why they're so important. They also have a lot of immune cells. So nature is genius in its design. And the way it operates is that 70 to 80% of your immune cells are in your gut. It's a very clever design because what happens is with immune cells, there's something called as gut-associated lymphatic tissue, which is all the immune cells which is next to the gut. Now think of this as a war zone. When bacteria and fungi and viruses are trying to attack your immunity of your body, your immune cells come to the rescue. But what is important is these immune cells are most likely soldiers, which are just being asked to fight those viruses. but the commander-in-chief is the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome and species of the gut microbiome actually teach your immune cells on what to do, who to attack, and who to let go. This is why they're a big part of the immune system as well. Now, so there's a quick fact for you guys. On an average, every woman every day applies 168 different chemicals, and men, not so much, but 85 different chemicals. Now, these chemicals come in form of deodorants. These chemicals enter your body in terms of face wash. And a lot of companies are not testing for some microtoxins that also enter your skin. Now, the vagus nerve, the way it communicates with your gut, is called the gut-brain axis. There's a term for it, the gut-brain axis. There is another term called the gut-skin axis. Now, with the gut-skin axis is a method why your gut microbiome communicates with your skin. And what happens is, if you have any kind of inflammation, oxidative stress, or any dysbiosis in your gut, it usually shows up in your skin. Now, your gut and your skin are very similar in a way. They both protect you from the outside world. They both have certain cells, which is called the mast cells. These are white blood cells, and they have a lot of immune factor and response in them. So, we've often thought that most of the times, all the skin problems that we had were coming because of many reasons. But we've never thought that, is it something in our gut that is actually causing it? When the gut is disturbed, it can show up in your body in a lot of ways. And via the gut-brain axis, you can see a lot of, let me share some examples with you. Here are some of the common skin problems that begin in the gut. Like, let's say something as common as dandruff. We think dandruff can be caused for many reasons, but it is actually the gut microbiome which is disturbed, or you're having a species of gut microbiome which is not allowing the other ones to thrive. So for the simplification, let's classify them as two: good bacteria and bad bacteria. And what they're doing, these two groups of bacteria are competing in your gut space to gain dominance over each other. If you don't have the right lifestyle habits and you don't make the right choices, the bad microbiome take over. And when they take over, you have something called as a gut dysbiosis, or an imbalance in the gut. There is something also called as the leaky gut syndrome. Heard of that before? Okay. So around our digestive tract, we have 4,000 square feet of space of a junction, which is tightly locked, just because when you eat something and you synthesize all these vitamins, these junctions allow or do not allow these toxins and metals and waste to enter your bloodstream, because via your bloodstream, they can enter your blood, they can enter your heart, and they can damage you. That is called a gut barrier. Now, leaky gut happens when you eat some things or you have certain lifestyle choices. It opens up junctions in the gut, and that causes intestinal permeability. And when that happens, a lot of the modern day diseases that we have heard about all begins from the gut. This reminds me of Hippocrates, because he figured this out when science couldn't. So I'd like to ask you a question. One of the most important things, according to me, in whether it comes to diseases, whether it comes to aging, whether it comes to gut microbiome and their health, is glycemic variability. Glycemic variability, to put it in a short way, is how soon your blood sugar rises after you eat certain kind of food or you do certain kind of activity. Now, over here I have 4 images. First is a bar of Snickers, which is just a normal chocolate. One is brown, healthy toast, a spoonful of sugar, and some fruits. And my question to you is, what do you think would respond in the highest glycemic variability, which means which raises your blood sugar the highest? Okay, so let's go by the raise of hands. So let's see for Snickers. One person. What about brown toast? One. 2, 3. Sugar? What about fruits?
It's a natural sugar. So
Okay.
it raises it, but in the natural, I don't know how to explain it.
Okay, perfect. So everyone thinks that fruit has a natural sugar and that raises it, right? But reality is the highest concentration of blood sugar that happens is after you have a slice of brown toast, which is considered to be the most healthiest, right? And since everyone thinks that fruit raises sugar or raises insulin, but it is healthy, right? Okay. And most of the times we've been advised to eat fruits and vegetables. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, let me debunk something for you. Fruits and vegetables are two different things. We normally classify them in the same group as they're healthy. But our ancestors only ate fruit when it was available in the season. And the only reason for them to eat fruit was to store enough fat for when winters come and when the fruits wouldn't be available. So now, 2.5 million years of history and of our genetic coding. If you eat fruit, you are telling you're giving this signal to your genes that it has to store fat. Where you see all around the world, and this might be shocking, but when you talk to geneticists and a lot of functional medicine practitioners, they would never advise you to have fruit. There's a specific type of fruit that you can, but most of the fruits that you have actually send a coding message to your genes that please let's store as fat because we will not have food available later. And you see this in most of the communities which eat a lot of food. We see diabetes, we see insulin deregulation, we see communities which are not the most healthiest. Although fruit might have some vitamins, but it's not essential for living. Now, when I talk about this, a lot of people get shocked and it takes some time to register. But what happens is, if you ask me, fruits and vegetables, if they have something in common, is the same as classifying as fish and bicycle. Vegetables, they're very healthy, certain type of vegetables. Fruits generally aren't. The only kind of fruits that you can have is tropical fruits only when they haven't ripened up. That means the fructose in the fruit hasn't built up. The fruit only consists of resistant starch. And resistant starch is something that feeds your gut microbiome and makes the good ones grow. Also about genes, since we spoke about genes. Did you know that human genes, as I mentioned before, were 20,000, right? Do you know how many genes does an almond have? It's 28,000. Water fleas, 31,000. Something as simple as corn, 32,000. So if we think we can blame everything on our genes and genes are very complicated, the genes of vegetables are even more complex than us. The only thing that makes us different and which brings us all these problems is the species of the gut microbiome. Now, let's see some information on weight loss. Obesity has tripled. That's a fact. Since 1975, we didn't have a lot of obese people before. Now, and the thing is, we asked this question that some people are always eating right, sleeping well, and they still can't lose enough weight. I remember when I first started my journey in health and fitness, I was trying a bit hard according to me, I was doing everything right. And then I had a friend, and by the show of hands, if anyone had a friend like me, who would eat anything and everything and would still remain thin.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And I would always think, why is this happening? I'm going to the gym 3 hours a day. I'm trying to do everything right. So the scientific community had this question as well. And then they did a research, and this is the experiment that was in the Journal of Immunology. They took two groups of rats. One was lean group, which is they were thinner, and one was an obese or fat group of mice. And all that they did was they harvested the microbiome from one group, the fat group, and they put it in the thin ones. Over a few weeks, the thin mice automatically became fat. And then they decided to turn the experiment again. This time they harvested the bacteria profile of the thin group and they put it in the fat mice. And automatically the fat group became thin. This raised a lot of questions. So a lot of labs in the world, they tried to do the same experiment. What they found out that there are two certain species of bacteria, Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes. Now, thin people have naturally lower levels of Firmicutes. So they did this experiment in humans. They took some Firmicutes and they put it in some lean people and they started getting fat. And with human trials, this proves to be a fact that bacterial genes or bacterial profile are able to harvest energy, utilize the nutrients, and even play a big role in energy consumption and expenditure. So while some bacteria can easily have a lot of food and they would digest it really fast and they wouldn't store it as triglycerides, some bacteria have the opposite effect.
So are we born with these or we can cultivate them?
You can, well, I have been looking all around the world to cultivate certain type of bacterial profile. And I've tried a lot of experiments. I've shipped in some bacterial eggs from Thailand. I've done a lot. But what I could tell you is you have to feed a certain type of nutrient or food to increase a certain kind of bacterial profile. So everyone wants to not put on weight and be lean and fit, right? So that means you need more Bacteroidetes. And one of the most proven strategies to increase the number of Bacteroidetes in your gut is to have more polyphenols. So polyphenols is this antioxidant-rich compound that comes in dark fruits and vegetables, which is mostly in blueberries. And you can have kale has a lot of polyphenols. Coffee has a lot of polyphenols. And this is the most easiest way to increase your Bacteroidetes because as I mentioned before, there's a war, right, between the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. If you feed the good bacteria enough, they multiply in their species, and they overpower the bad bacteria. So even if you have a balance between Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes, if you increase your Bacteroidetes, they will overpower their Firmicutes, and they will take over. So now you have a bacteria that harvests energy really fast, doesn't put any food in your fat cells, and also reduces insulin. When they moved all these bacterial profiles, they also found out that a lot of people like reverse type 2 diabetes had better memory and executive learning functions. So it just doesn't affect your weight, it affects every part of your body. This is again because of our gut-brain axis. And this is another hack if you want to get into weight loss. Just try to find more species of Bacteroidetes. Or just have, for me, it's not even harvesting something very specific, but just have a wide variety of bacteria. Because if you let one species grow and take over, it can be devastating, as we'll learn. So, any sports people in the house? Anyone does sports? Some young people there? Okay, perfect. So, knowing what we know right now, let's see how it affects athletic performance. Now, the gut microbiome are responsible for breaking down carbs, proteins, fats. What recent research, which is just published a week ago, has shown us is that the microbiome diversity in your gut can take something very simple such as carbohydrates, and you would think, okay, I'm eating a protein or carbohydrates, and if they're dysfunctional, they can change it into something completely different. In the study that was published was they fed a group with white rice, which is completely carbs, and the microbes digested it as branch chain amino acids, which is a precursor to protein. And this has never been done in the history before. A certain group has been completely changed just by the microbiome because they wanted to have that, they wanted to eat that specific thing. And now since the gut-brain axis and the inflammatory process, we also understand that it impacts all parts of our body. Science then asks the question that what if now all the countries are trying to build the best athletes, the best sportsmen, and now we have this question that can we harvest the microbiome from a sports person, an athlete like Usain Bolt, and transfer it into a normal person? Will that person automatically become fitter? Or can we now understand the mechanisms and the pathways on how these gut microbiome operate and just make it into a prebiotic or a probiotic fiber? And what you can do is just consume it, and these microbiome will automatically going to make you faster, stronger. So these are the things that are going on right now. And a lot of pharmaceutical companies and a lot of supplement companies have already acted on it. We have now probiotics from ultra distance marathon runners. We have a lot of prebiotic fibers from weightlifters, and they've been used in sports right now. So science is already way ahead of this. So how are the microbiome and the performance related? We know that calcium and magnesium is very important for our bones, right? Calcium and magnesium is also synthesized by the microbiome. So if you have a disproportionate or a dysbiosis or an imbalance in your microbiome, those minerals and nutrients never get absorbed. And that could affect your bones, osteoporosis, arthritis. All of these things can be a possibility if you have a dysfunctional microbiome. Reduces inflammation. So for sportsmen, one of the main things that they require is to reduce their levels of inflammation, because inflammation is a basic thing for all chronic diseases. It all starts as chronic low-grade inflammation, and it then builds up into different things. So it's very important that we start controlling the inflammation for athletes or any sports performance, because they're more inclined, because of their swelling muscles, because of their training regime, they're more inclined to getting more inflammation damage. Shapes ideal body composition. We learned about the bacteroidetes and firmicutes. So does that mean that a sportsman now doesn't have to run as much or can have more rest because his microbial profile is doing everything for them? Energy levels. There are certain species of bacteria which are very good at providing energy as well. So that's why some people when you see them, they're always low on energy, and some people have ultra energy all the time. It all happens because of the composition of the microbiome. Well, that's going reverse. Improve sleep. The neurotransmitter I spoke about and the connection was serotonin, but there's something else as well. There's another neurotransmitter called as GABA, which is GABA aminobutyric acid. And this specific neurotransmitter makes you relax and helps you fall into deep sleep. The gut microbiome are responsible for producing that as well. Hydration status. A lot of these microbiome can store enormous amounts of water, and because they are next to your gut lining, it helps your hydration. Mental strength. This is again with the gut-brain axis. So now we have seen so many of the problems. Or let's talk about a few more. What about heart diseases? Now we know that they can affect your weight loss or fat gain. But what about heart diseases? So the University of Washington did a study, and they found out that when you see at major heart diseases, there is a certain compound called as TMAO, that is trimethylamine N oxide. And it's one of the metabolites which can exactly tell you whether you are going to have a heart disease or any kind of cardiovascular disease. How you get TMAO is because of your gut microbiome. So choline is one of the B complex vitamins. When you digest choline and you have a certain species of bacteria called as gamma protobacteria, they convert choline into something called as TMA, which is trimethylamine. Now, when it enters your body, it automatically converts it into TMAO. So the basic thing here is that these gut microbiome can also predict if you're going to have a heart disease or not. Let's say, for example, heart attack, or let's say arteriosclerosis, which is the hardening up of arteries. They have found that when you have a certain species of bacteria called as Collinsella, these bacteria can determine how arteriosclerosis affects you in the long run. Now let's talk about some action steps that we can take to avoid damaging our gut microbiome. First thing is antibiotics. So a lot of people advocate for antibiotics, but what antibiotics do is antibiotics. So it kills, it's like, I want you to imagine a bomb, or let's imagine something bigger, a nuclear bomb. And antibiotics is like a nuclear bomb that goes into your gut. And when it explodes, it kills all kind of microbial species possible. So you might be prescribed that you have to take an antibiotic, but that antibiotic will not know if it's killing the good bacteria or the bad bacteria. So it goes inside and creates this war zone where everyone dies. And it's very difficult, and I've tried to do this before, but it gets very difficult to get back all the good bacteria when you have antibiotics. So it's better to avoid antibiotics if you can. This is artificial sweeteners. So in human trials, we've learned that artificial sweeteners, except if it's stevia, they cause metabolic damage and increase the rate of type 2 diabetes. What happens is you can fool your body with calories because sugar has more calories than a sweetener. But the way your pancreas release insulin, cannot be fooled. So when you're having this artificial sweetener, it actually produces more insulin, and it's got some toxic material as well, which damages your gut microbiome. Okay, preservatives. Now, preservatives as well, what they do is they're not natural compounds. So your gut hasn't evolved to completely digest them. So watch out for most of the preservatives that go into modern food. Anything that you eat which is processed can have something called as polycarbonate or monocellulose. There are a variety of components. So if you're trying to choose a food, try for it not to be so processed and have a lot of preservatives, because that determines the gut of your health of your gut. And says that's the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which is Advil or Panadol, things like this. So this as well causes a lot of irritation in the gut microbiome and causes them to not act on 100%. It reduces their drive from 100 to like 30%. And when they're not functioning to their best, you're not going to be functioning to your best. Sugar, what sugar does is it promotes the growth of bacteria, which is the bad bacteria like Candida albicans, and you don't want that. So it's one of those foods which are in the category of which they support bad bacteria.
What about aspirin?
Sorry?
Aspirin.
Aspirin as well is an NSAID drug, so it does impact your gut microbiome. Also, these drugs, in a recent study, they've shown to reduce a lot of human connection. So the way it works and the way it affects your body, you might get rid of a headache, but your social connection, the pathways in your brain that light up social connection, will be reduced. So I would recommend, if you have to take them, just be careful and know that while you might be treating a headache, you might be damaging something which is even more bigger, which is your gut health. Stress. So what happens with stress is your brain and your gut have always been communicating. Now, when your brain suffers any kind of stress, it activates your gut microbiome a lot, and the gut microbiome becomes stressed. And when they become stressed, they don't stand up to do what they're meant to be doing. They don't synthesize vitamins, they don't produce essential nutrients, they don't manufacture neurotransmitters. So if you're stressed, it's not just a
That's
physical.
one factor which is not in our hands at times. You know, the
It
others
is.
we can control, but this is
Well, there are things that you
we
could.
all can't.
There is, but it's better to understand that it does affect your gut microbiome as well.
We don't.
There are a lot of things like meditation, deep breathing, which you can do to, which you can take, which you can, these all steps, and which we'll be talking about in biohacking, which you can do to reduce your stress levels. Because if you know you are getting stressed, you know that it's not just temporary, because we don't still understand the amount of damage that it could do to the gut. We know that there is some kind of damage, but depending on everyone's stress levels, it's different. So as a general rule, try not to be stressed. Also, when we look at a lot of people who have lived for the longest time, these are people living in the blue zones. These are geographical areas all around the world which have the highest longevity rates and the most amount of centenarians, which are people who are living above 100 and which are healthy. We see that one of the most common factors in all of them is that they have very low levels of stress. So this could perhaps be relative to longevity as well, because if you don't take stress, chances are that you are thriving all the time and your gut microbiome is thriving. Smoking, I think I don't have to say much about this. Smoking. But what we've seen is in studies that if you're smoking, your gut microbial profile changes. And it changes to something which is very similar to people who have obesity. So if you're smoking, your gut microbial profile changes and it starts doing all the same mechanisms of someone who might have obesity. That means blood sugar regulation changes, the way you deposit triglycerides changes, cholesterol regulation changes. So it's a general rule of thumb, it's better not to smoke.
A neurological study in USA, a research study, has recommended smoking because it prevents, in restraint quantity, number say 3 or 4 a day, because it prevents Alzheimer.
I would have to check on that. But we will talk a lot about Alzheimer's shortly. And wow, thank you for sharing that. I will definitely love to have a look at that research.
On the study sponsored by tobacco companies.
I'm sure it was. So let's look at some tips. Now we know what to avoid. Now let's look at the things that we have to do to boost the health of our gut microbiome. Eat organic and local veggies. So vegetables are great, but when you buy organic, you reduce a lot of toxic materials, pesticides, which go onto it. And when you have these beautiful looking vegetables which have been shipped all around the world, we don't really know how are they so fresh. A lot of times they have toxic elements like glyphosate, or they have been a part of the Roundup. And it's much better to just go to your local farmer and buy something which has been produced in the backyard.
It's not very easy to do. Very difficult.
I'm sure here it's a bit difficult, right? Okay, so breastfeeding for women over any formula. This is because when the baby is born, it has certain amount of the gut microbiome from the mother. But as a mother breastfeeds children, the microbiome increases. And they always recommend that the more the baby is close to the mother or touching the skin of the mother, it helps them grow more microbiome. So if you know someone who's pregnant, just please advise them to go for breastfeeding. Okay, don't be a hygiene freak. So what happens most of the times is we're always careful about if we're going outside, we have to come and wash our hands. And what do we wash our hands with? Antibacterial, right? What that prevents us from doing is absorbing any good bacteria that is there in the environment. So if you're walking through a park, or if you're walking through some nature, please don't use antibacterial all the time. Use something which is not antibacterial, because when the one way to increase the gut microbial diversity is to get in touch with a lot of microbiomes which are in our environment and which will be helpful for us. Intermittent fasting. Has anyone heard of intermittent fasting? Everyone? Perfect. So what happens with intermittent fasting is when you don't eat for 8 to 9 hours, some of the good bacteria which help you lose weight, which help you get more energy, which detoxify you, they thrive in an environment which is not continuously being supplied by food. So if you go on an average 9, 12, 16, 18 hours without food, those microbial diversity will increase. Stick to a schedule. We've seen in a lot of people who are eating at the same time, sleeping at the same time, have better sleep levels, have better energy levels, opposed to people who don't have a schedule. If you're eating at the right time, your microbiome is programmed to grow at the right time. Get a pet. So this again relates to the hygiene part of it. As humans, we are always scared of something is going to happen to us, our immune system might function, and we're always cleaning our hands and making sure everything is perfectly clean. Well, when you have a pet, they don't care about most of these things. So they put their hands, legs, face in most of the places. And they've shown that people with pets have a variety or a higher range of microbial diversity than people who do not have pets. This is just because you get in touch with the pets, and those pets will increase your gut microbiome. Get out and play. We've seen that people who live in the countryside have a better microbial diversity, have less stress, have more levels of energy. This is all because they're outside in the environment and they're continuously being exposed to this variety of diversity of microbiome. So getting a pet, don't be a hygiene freak, and get out and play is similar. Get plenty of sleep. When you do not get enough sleep, your body goes into a stress overdrive. And when your body goes into stress overdrive because of the gut-brain connection, your gut microbiome suffers. And they cannot multiply. They cannot do the things that they're meant to do. So an effective type would be 7 to 9 hours of sleep every day. Exercise the right amount. A lot of people nowadays they exercise a lot. I've seen people who have exercised 6 to 7 times a week, an hour a day at least. But how exercise works is on the principle of hormesis, which is something which in large amount might be bad for you. It can be good for you in a small amount. So if you keep exercising all the time, it causes a lot of stress. So lower down on your exercise. Don't give your body enough hormetic stressors, because your body has to deal with a lot of things. Lights in the environment, food, pollution, toxic gases. On the top of that, if you're exercising most of the times, it's going to create a dysbiosis in your gut. Test your microbiome. Now we have technology where we can test our microbiome as well. You can get species tested. You can test for your microbial diversity. And there are companies, at least in the US and in Russia, who are doing this already. And they can give you a sample size of how does your microbial profile looks like and what you can do about it. Perfect. So with that, we've ended the presentation on gut health. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have some. Please.
One thing you haven't touched upon is the role of dairy products on your gut microbiome. The fermented dairy products versus the non-fermented, whether it has any deleterious effect, a good effect, or a bad effect.
So, thanks for the question.
Along with this, please enlighten us on the role of fats, oils and fats.
Perfect. Let's answer those questions. So first to you, sir. The role of, you said the dairy products, right? So what happens with fermented products is when you keep a product to be fermented, there is a lot of bacteria that gets on top of it. Sauerkraut, kimchi, paneer, and any ancient techniques of harvesting pickle, what they do is they build up essential prebiotic and probiotic fiber. And when you eat those foods, you have a wide variety of microbiome going in. Dairy, on the other hand, is different because it destroys the leaky gut, or it encourages the leaky gut. It opens up, if you're having just a normal dairy, most of us, we can take dairy, but we're not supposed to thrive on it. So if you're having milk from a cow, chances are you might not get any allergic reaction to it, but it will open up loops in your gut junction through which a lot of other chemicals might just slip into your blood. On the other hand, when you're having fermented food, it's completely different. Fermented foods actually help the gut microbiome a lot. It's one of those things which encourages the diversity and which is also related to prebiotics. So if you're taking any kind of prebiotic, it does the same thing as fermented foods. So I would recommend fermented foods.
Curd is okay.
Yogurt is it's not the best because it has more when you compare it to the microbial stance, the amount of bacteria that is on it is not as much as the amount of dairy that's on it. So I would say if you had to have a yogurt, have it, but not all the time. It's not the best. Although what you can have is kefir. Does anyone know of kefir?
Yeah.
It's the form. So if you can have kefir, or you can have tea like kombucha, all of these have these essential prebiotic fibers in them, and these microbiome can affect your gut diversity. Does that answer your question? Perfect.
Achar, you just mentioned pickle. You mean our pickles, or do you mean pickle as in the US?
Well, any pickle which has been fermented and which has been kept stored for some time will build bacteria on it. Now the question is, the question again becomes pickles in India, what kind of fats are they being fermented in? Because also preservatives. So what happens is,
The ones which are made at home don't have to.
yeah, let's talk about commercial ones, which is available to everyone. What happens is your cells are made out of tiny droplets of fat, which is a cell membrane, right? And it takes about 680 days to turn over these cell membranes. If you ask me to have a spoonful of sugar or have something with some kind of bad fat, I would choose this sugar. Because with sugar, I can walk around, I can run, I can go to the gym, and I can metabolize that sugar. But once any kind of bad fat, which is in the commercial achars, enters your body, it would be a part of the cell membrane, and it would take 680 days to recycle those. So I would stay away from the commercial ones. But yes, if you can do something at home and you account for all the variants that go into it, that would be the best.
On the question of dairy, like our ancestors and our grandmothers all had milk and they all lived long. So the question is that is it the milk that's the culprit, or is the today's milk, the hormones and all that go to the cow and the way that it is, is that the culprit? So if you get milk that is not from a good cow and it's from a good dairy where they don't have chemicals, isn't it still a good source of calcium and
There are many food groups which are much higher in calcium than dairy to begin with. And our ancestors, you can have most of the vegetables. You can have kale, you can have spinach, you can have all these things. They're abundant in calcium supply. And what happens with our ancestors going back was a lot of the milk that they had was also fermented. They did not, when you're talking about the longest lived ones, our genome cannot decode, even if you supply yourself with a certain strand of like digestive enzymes, it's still difficult for you to digest that milk completely. And when I talk about digestion, there's something which can give you some kind of allergic reaction or some kind of a distress, and there's something which doesn't make you to be 100% you. So milk is one of those things. It might not affect you in a bad way right now, but maybe you have some chronic low-grade inflammation that spikes up after 24, 48 hours, which is hard for you or me or anyone to comprise. But as a general rule of thumb, avoiding milks and anything with antibiotics or any growth hormone-feeded cows, is that, so,
What about milk for children?
sorry?
Children, milk?
I would suggest not to give children any milk because children are, I mean, milk isn't really necessary for growth. There are other things which are, because you can compare things which are nutritionally dense, which have a certain profile when it comes to regulating hormones or regulating different growth factors. Although one of the things which are nice is things that come from milk, which is colostrum. Colostrum is a substance which has a lot of growth factors. So I would say if you can just isolate colostrum and remove the dairy out of it, then you get like there are companies in the world which are manufacturing it.
But can't you, colostrum is the first milk of
Yes.
newborn.
Yes.
But can't you have that? Or
You can. You should have colostrum only if you want to increase certain growth factors. Now the way colostrum works, it increases something called IGF-1, insulin like growth factor 1. This is the same mechanism that increases growth, but at the same time can increase development of cancer as well. So it all depends on which stage of life do you use it. A lot of times, if you want to grow and children want to grow, you can give them that, but a lot of children in the world, or like the majority amount of children in the world now, they're growing perfectly fine without having any kind of milk.
Soya milk?
Commercial soya milk has a lot of GMO and it has a lot of glyphosate. So I would say, and about 70% of the soy in the world is GMO. So I would not suggest that. But yes, if you want an alternative, you can have almond milk or you can have coconut milk.
let's try to go with the mic. I'll pass it around.
What's your take on apple cider vinegar?
Oh,
which is,
apple cider vinegar, which is...
and also probiotics. And which way is the best way to take it? On an empty tummy, alongside food, or what? The probiotics and apple cider vinegar.
So apple cider vinegar, it serves as two functions. It's a mediator of blood insulin. What we see in all of these blue zones is they have, and me personally, I use apple cider vinegar just before first thing when I wake up, to change my stomach, to rise up my stomach acidity levels, and then right before I have something to eat, which is lunch or dinner.